Florida or rainy Florida, whichever the case may be. So Jeff, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, so if you would introduce yourself a little bit, sir, and the show is all yours.
Can you see my screen?
I can see the one that says HP Software LeanFT, yes.
We can, and just FYI, we are recording, so.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, fair enough. All right, well, so tonight we're going to be covering LeanFT, and so I'm going to kind of speed through some of these slides so I make sure I can get everybody's questions in. But I'm going to introduce what HP LeanFT is, and then we'll also talk about licensing. So my name's Jeff Fillegar. I'm a solution architect at HP Software. I cover all the application development stack. So that means HP's ALM and Performance Center, which is our test repository application for all things testing, requirements, test cases, defects. And then on the performance side, it's performance testing from a scenario-based perspective, and that's also where it integrates with ALM in order to store your performance tests as well. And then in our secondary, can you see?
Yeah, we have your screen up. Your home screen.
Okay. So in this swim lane here, you can kind of see this, all of our solutions, and we start with the HP Sprinter. This is going to be our exploratory manual testing tool, and then we have, and they're all integrated into ALM. So this is where you author the test scripts, and this is where you would save them and run them. And then UFT, or QTP, as some of you mentioned on the phone, and this is going to be our automated functional testing tool. Your traditional record and playback, and then obviously you can enhance it and apply industry standards for test automation and data-driven frameworks. Then we'll move into the right. We have HP LoadRunner. So LoadRunner, actually, there's a community version. If you Google HP LoadRunner, it comes with 50 free virtual users. So LoadRunner is going to be our performance testing tool, and that'll be where you author all of your scripts. And then if you've got Performance Center, that's where you can execute them in a scenario-based environment. Performance Center is more for enterprise-wide type performance testing. Tens of thousands of virtual users, and LoadRunner standalone's more for for the smaller transaction types. Obviously, LoadRunner can also be scale, but we always recommend to run on Performance Center because it's more server-based versus workstation-based. And I believe Robert mentioned StormRunner Load. It's going to be our cloud-based solution. So your traditional use case for that would be Black Friday, where, let's say, Macy's.com wants, they own Performance Center, but they don't own 1 million virtual users, because 9 months out of the year they don't need to validate that type of load. But between basically middle of July and November, they are running with millions of virtual users in order to prepare for Black Friday. So when a Black Friday ad comes out and everyone hits the website, what happens? It crashes. So this is how companies can ramp up their load testing without buying large amounts of virtual users. They just basically lease them or rent them for X amount of time. And if we talk about mobile testing, on actual devices, so you can do record and playback. And if you're familiar with UFT, it has add-ins, right? So if you're going to do a browser, it'd be you select the web add-in. But if you're going to test on a mobile device, meaning an Android device or iOS, or and soon-to-be Windows device, then you would select the mobile add-in, and that gives you that same core capabilities UFT has, but instead of on a traditional browser, then you can use on the actual native device. So it gives you the full spectrum from testing, testing on traditional browsers, desktop applications, and now inside of the mobile center or mobile space. And Mobile Center is basically the repository where you store all of your apps under test and device under test. So you get central device management, central app management. Any questions so far? I kind of introduced kind of the whole stack, and we're going to cover LeanFT here in the next few slides.
I think we're good, Jeff.
All right, so why LeanFT? Why new product? especially with a lot of some of these open source products that are out there. And in my professional experience, open source is free in liberty, however, never free in cost. And what does that mean? So basically, even if the tool is free, it still costs to develop it, maintain it, etc. So, why buy a product from a vendor, whether it's HP or CA or whoever, IBM? It's because now you've got full support. You've got a full community, and you get full integration to all of your other products. That's kind of the general idea. But when we specifically talk about LeanFT, we are targeting a particular persona, and when we talk about shift left. So this is an Agile group, and so if you're doing some type of iterative sprint-based testing where, maybe you've got a 2-week sprint, and you're in that particular sprint, you've got a number of user stories and work items that you're working toward. So at the end of the sprint, you have a working product, right? But in order to scale Agile testing, you have to have some form of automation testing, right? You can't run all your manual regression tests and then also account for doing your manual new feature tests. So that's where test automation really plays a big role inside of Agile. And it doesn't have to be true Agile. Most organizations I work with, run some type of a hybrid form of Agile, waterfall, right? And usually, I would say probably 8 out of 10 of the big shops, you've got web-based development, and then you've got some type of ERP or back-end system. So you might have in the ERP system with one environment, then you have a separate environment for web-based testing, and then you have like an integration sprint where you do all of your integration testing. That's where a lot of the automation comes into play, and that's where LeanFT and UFT will play their role. So if you kind of look at this illustration here, you've got lean functional testing, and we're really targeting the dev tester or the test engineer who's traditionally been working with UFT or Selenium or whatever the other tools are, and now they want to actually start writing interactive unit test cases. So I'll repeat that, interactive unit test cases. And you will author them in the same IDE that the application under test is. So if you're writing in Java, you'll be authoring LeanFT scripts inside of Eclipse. If the application or test is a .NET app, you'll be authoring LeanFT scripts inside of Visual Studio. And so the way that we have developed this is we are using, if you're familiar with unit test frameworks, NUnit for .NET, JUnit for Java, we have take those frameworks for those templates. So if you're familiar with the IDEs, you can use one of these templates to create a project. We've expanded those templates so that they become we expand those templates so that you can author an interactive unit test versus having to write all of your unit test code by hand. And so the theory there is that if we are targeting existing UFT users with LeanFT, then some of the concepts and object identification mechanisms and tooling are going to be the same. So conceptually, inside of UFT, if you're familiar, you have an object repository that stores all of your objects that you interact with, and then in code you can interact with them from a property method perspective. Well, same thing with LeanFT. You can create objects, and you have descriptions and methods that you can interact with, so that way when you click quote-unquote the play button, it records back, and the script knows what object on screen you're interacting with. And similar, if we move down to the how we identify objects. So inside of UFT, you have an object repository, and it's usually property-based or index-based, right? First object on the screen is a 0, followed by 1, 2, 3, etc. Inside of .NET and Java, similar concept, but you might want to use like XPath or CSS-based. That way you've got more in-depth object identification mechanism when you're actually using the source code versus a compiled version. And then kind of the bigger difference, object repository, we're gonna use the word application model, and the object spy, right, with UFT, we're gonna call that the object identification center. I still call it the object spy regardless of which tool I'm in, because it sounds better for me. and I've been saying Object Spy for a number of years. And those of you who remember the GUI map, so you had the GUI map Windrunner, and then Object Spy with UFT and QTP, and now Object Identification Center with LeanFT. Some feature comparison, UFT, LeanFT. So you can, with UFT, and it's going to be, VB script based, right? Record and playback, real object oriented kind, where you've got object repository and you've got inherent code that's written for you when you're in record mode, and then obviously you can modify it to your needs, especially when you're doing like a data-driven framework. It also supports version control systems like Git, and ALM obviously has its own. GUI based, API based, as far as scripts are concerned. And then LeanFT, you're going to actually write the test, like I said, in C# or Java. So I think that's the kind of the bigger learning curve there. From a traditional test automation engineer has been using like scripting languages, and now they're actually have a capability to write in C# or Java. So I think that's a good thing from a test engineer's perspective. Kind of increases your bandwidth or your skill set. And then supported test platforms. So obviously with UFT, it's been around for, I guess, 15 years now. Desktop applications, mainframe, Windows, web, and then all the big ERP systems, SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft, etc. With LeanFT, it went live or general availability on the 19th of July. So where are we at? Just a couple months old, right? So it's basically a 1.0 version, if you will. But we basically kind of ported over a lot of the capabilities. So from UFT to LeanFT, so it supports WinForms, WPF, obviously web, mobile, and then also SAP. SAP is not on here, but each month we're increasing the supported test platform. See, any questions so far?
Well, we're all just listening to you, Jeff.
All right. So I just built this slide out. So normally I talk about licenses usually at the end, but because of LeanFT's flexibility, I kind of like to talk about it now. So if you have a UFT license, which is a full functional test license, so you have GUI and API capabilities, then you get LeanFT for free. So basically if you had a concurrent license model for 10 users, then that technically means you could run 5 UFT licenses and 5 LeanFT licenses at the same time, or some permutation of those. So we are giving LeanFT away to all UFT customers, or I should say we are including LeanFT with the UFT 12.5 stack. So that's it's a pretty big win for the UFT customer base. Now, if you're a new customer, you can buy UFT license. Buy the UFT full functional license, and you'll get LeanFT, obviously. Or you can purchase LeanFT by itself on a web sale. You can go out and Google LeanFT, and you can go out there and anybody can. I think it's don't quote me on this, but because they change the pricing every once in a while. But I think it's $139 per user per month. So it's anybody can basically go out there and buy it. And it can be bought standalone, or I should say it could be bought standalone. And then the mix and match, if you just want LeanFT and the GUI side of UFT, you can do that. Or if you just want LeanFT and the runtime engine, you can do that. So what the runtime engine? So for those legacy test automations engineers in the room or on the phone, you've probably had some type of VMware or physical test lab set up at one point in time in your career, and you're running a bunch of scripts, and you have to have a full-blown version of UFT or QTP installed, and it eats up a full license. Now with runtime engine, you can deploy just the runtime DLLs, if you will, and now all you need, and then if you're using ALM or Quality Center, you can just run the script, say, hey, well, run this script on machine A, and you don't need a full version, full license instance of UFT out there, it'll just run the script and just report back. So it's, I came from an environment a couple years ago where we had 110 virtual machines for our test lab, and so we had to maintain a full installed version of UFT in our VMware image, which is a couple gigs. So runtime engines, maybe 200 megs, I think. So basically reduce the footprint by about 80%. So, 80%, you take 80% of a disk consumed C or the data drive on a VM environment, you save yourself quite a bit of space and money. So that's a good thing with the runtime engine. And I heard some people talk about CI tools like Jenkins and Hudson, etc. So build server. So for those of you who don't know, HP software is fully integrated inside of the Jenkins stack. So you actually Google Jenkins and HP ALM, or Google Jenkins and HP Load Runner, or Google Jenkins and HP UFT. And the community, we have supported add-ins out there on the Jenkins site where you can download and use them in your environment. So basically gives you the capability to run, for example, if you're doing a build in Jenkins, you can actually have through the command line, you can kick off UFT scripts directly from the Jenkins console. So that's one of the more interesting things in the way that HP software shifted to the open source community is, all the big vendors used to be all closed off, right, a few years ago. And now we've kind of, at least HP software's opened up, and we're now accepted inside of some of these communities, and we actually have supported utilities out from the community, big player in the GitHub area. You actually see probably in future state of some of our products where Git actually comes with it, so that's kind of interesting. But as far as LeanFT is concerned, it's fully integrated with all of your developer ecosystem, if you will, because LeanFT is built inside of the IDEs, built inside of Visual Studio and Eclipse. So I think that's a pretty big win for the test engineer community. Any questions?
Not at this time. Okay, wait, one question.
A question about the installation of runtime engine. Currently I use like the 20-25 VMs. So if I have to can I just uninstall and install only the runtime engine?
That's correct. So it's that's correct. So 12.5, UFT 12.5, the runtime engine, LeanFT, and UFT are all on the ISO or the DVD. And so, there's instructions on installing the runtime engine and what you need to do as far as setting it up so it can talk, whether a command line or talk to ALM. So, but yes, to answer your question, you can uninstall UFT and install runtime engine if the VM is specifically for just execution.
And they have to be at 12.5 currently, right?
12.5, that's correct.
Yeah, you have to be current with 12.5.
So at present we use 12.01, I guess, or 12.1. So do we have to upgrade the scripts for them to work on?
Scripts, the scripts will work. Well, if you authored a script in 12.1, it'll work inside of 12.5. There's not a quote-unquote upgrade for the script.
If anything happens or in the runtime I can't debug or anything, right? So
that's correct. So that's why what I recommend is, say if you've got 25 VMs, you probably put 20 of them with the runtime engine and leave 5 with UFT, and probably on those 5 UFT full license UFT ones is probably where you put your troubled scripts, meaning the ones that sometimes have errors. And then leave the other 20 for the ones that where you're 100% confident your script's going to work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so a few screenshots. So this is what the Object Spy or Object Identification Center looks like. This little screenshot here. So if I'm trying to learn, if you will, a web link or an href link, it gives me a list of attributes and properties that I can record or save that I can interact with, just like the object repository does inside of UFT. And so it'll store this inside of an application model, or which is object repository, or I can just use descriptive programming. So if you've ever used descriptive programming inside of UFT, or if you're a Selenium user and Selenium's all descriptive programming, this gives you that capability to build that descriptive code without having to write any of it. And I'll show you that here in a second. So it's kind of an interactive way to build test scripts and write code at the same time. Let's see, I recovered what we support. All right, so how it works. I'm going to be using Visual Studio as an example here. So if I'm in Visual Studio and I'm using 2013, and I say I want to create a new project, a LeanFT and unit project. And then what it does, it builds me like a template script. So here's kind of like the class, if you will. So this is where we start talking. We start getting geeky and we start talking about code. So here you see like you've got the test attribute. So this is going to be where all the test script code is. But there's some other methods before that, kind of where you set the test up. Maybe you got to initialize some variables, etc. Go read from a data table or a database and create an object. Pass those values down into the test method, and that runs the script. And then tear down and is basically what test script cleanup. So it gives you this framework as a starting point. That's kind of like the LeanFT starting point. But if you're familiar with any in-unit test, this is basically the same thing. So we've extended the in-unit test framework or JUnit test framework. And then step 3, so if I was inside of that test method, I'm going to basically launch the browser, right? So browser.launch, and then I want to navigate to a URL. So even though this is C#, the code should be hopefully easy to somewhat follow. So if I'm navigating to the browser, this is open the browser, it's navigate to hp.com, and then I want to describe the link. So if I'm in descriptive programming, for those who've used Selenium or descriptive programming inside of UFT, this is a similar concept. So I'm describing what the link is, and so the link, the inner text, is tablets, right, and the index is 4. So with UFT, if you want to use get RO property and one of the properties is inner text or index, this is where we get that information from. If you're ever familiar, if you ever want to know how Object Repository does that, this is how it does it. And so we basically set that description to a variable, and then we could just apply a method .click, right? Or if it was a text box, I could do .set, and and then have a value in quotes that I want to set in the text box. So yeah, we're writing in C# and or Java, but as far as conceptually of how you author a script, start and end at the same spot, it's just traditional best practice for automation scripts, right? And you open the browser, navigate to where you need to be, populate a form, validate something on screen, log out, right? So same concept.
Cool. Okay. So I have some questions. So who here? So for IDEs, how many people here are using Visual Studio for their IDE? Like in your groups, and maybe not you guys in your groups, but just one, really? Okay. How about using Eclipse? Eclipse. How are you using anything else, and what is it?
I usually see the text editor.
Oh. The text editor?
There are tools like Sublime, so it's not IDE, but...
Text editor, yeah.
Actually, the question that we should be asking is, what is the technology that your application or test is written in? And
yeah, that was my next question. Yeah.
And can you, get Visual Studio or access to the source code, Eclipse or Visual Studio, and access to the source code, and then work closely or closer with your development counterparts? Because that's really where the value is here. Instead of so right now, what happens? Developer makes a code change, they do a build, they deploy it to your test environment, they send you an email, go run a sanity test or whatever, right? Well, that's a lot of process just in order to validate something. But now if you shift left and the developer makes a code change, you can get latest on the repository, have the source code right there on your desktop, and then write a little unit test script and validate that the functionality is there. And then you could do the traditional deployment, do the build, deploy the test environment. But what this is doing is circumventing all these smaller iterative sprints into a larger test environment. Now you can kind of get up in front or be left and hopefully build more or test more functionality faster and sooner, and then go into your traditional regression testing inside your test environment where you're running your traditional UFT test cases.
Okay, cool. And then who's writing in C#? C#? .NET? Java? 1, 2, 3. Okay, 3 Java. And then anything else? Like, is anyone writing tests in anything else?
Ruby as well.
Ruby?
Ruby, Python, Shell script.
Okay. And Shell. Okay. So there's so 3 for Java. None for .NET. Is anyone F1, and also, because there's none for .NET, is anyone here?
One thing, Robert, you say C# and .NET, C#.
Oh, C# 1, okay. And then, is that different? Like, is anyone doing .NET development but not writing in C# but not writing the test? Okay, all right, this is just checking. All right, it's good. That's good information. It's good to know. Okay. And then is there anything else you want to ask or poll the room?
I would like to ask another question for Jeff.
Okay.
So where exactly are you storing the element properties in? I didn't see the place where you are capturing those element properties.
Could you hear the question, Jeff?
I could not.
Okay, so the question is, where are you storing the element properties?
Yeah.
That is
no object repository.
There is no object repository. He's writing that is in a descriptive programming. You can use object identification center in LeanFT to identify the properties and use those properties, build that physical description into your coding. So like currently in QTP/UFT, we have an object repository actually, so where you give a logical name and the physical description within that, so you can refer the logical name in your scripting, but here there is no logical name. It's all physical description that you write in the programming.
If the element property changes somehow in the UI, how do you...
That is exactly right. So you have to change it up there, or you can create another library and create your a function to runtime. In runtime you create like right now, even without using object repository, you can use the descriptive object, right? So you can create a variable and assign it your properties to that, and then they are all at one place. It's kind of a one function instead of object repository. You can refer those variables in there. Likewise, here also you can create one function to create all the variables and whatever you are saying, like if the object property changes and all. So you have one place to change instead of several places. I think that's what I got right, but we can confirm it.
Nope, you were spot on. Someone was paying attention.
Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah, and I know it's not easy to see here, but that screen there is a little bit dynamic in the sense that you can start clicking on things and you can copy and paste stuff in. So it's not just pure typing, it is an interactive type of screen. And you're not going to get all the answers here today, but if you go to the HP website and you go to the LeanFT, there's WebExes, there's demos, there's all kinds of information and presentations on the website that will give you additional insights. And then, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's also a free trial where you can download and use a free trial for like 30 days.
Yes, all of our products have free trials. All right, so I've started. Lost my license here. Let me get my license back. It's late, so LeanFT sometimes doesn't like to work this late.
Must be a union person.
Exactly.
They're pretty early. Well,
have a question while you're running this. Do you have IntelliSense in it, like in UFT when you try to write something so it pops up and show you, right? So.
Yes, yeah, we have IntelliSense. So, I mean, this is Visual Studio, right? So you have full access to the entire .NET library, right? So, and any functionality that you can do inside of Visual Studio, you can do inside, because this is basically just a template, an unit-based template. So, and then any of the, for example, like if I've got an object here for a browser, I've got full IntelliSense where I can interact with the browser, right? So same concept that you have inside of UFT with browser.page browser.page.object.method, same concept. So real quick, if I have my Object Spy / Object Identification Center. So I've got this demo application. If I want to start spying, and I click on this little text box here, then it shows me, here's a list of all the properties and attributes, and LeanFT actually says, well, based on our based on looking at the code, we can see that, hey, these are going to be the most popular attributes because the developer has properly tagged them, etc. And this is what we want to use to identify the object. So then, if I mouse over here, it says Generate Code to Clipboard. I click on that, and I navigate back over to Visual Studio, and I Control V, so I paste it. So basically, creates the descriptive programming syntax for me. And then all I have to do is, add the method that I want to use. So set value. So if you're familiar with UFT, set value, set secure, right? Set secure to be encrypted, and set value is just plain text. And then set value, and then whatever the value I wanted to work with. So basically, I've launched a browser, navigated to this website, and then I've inputted the value .NET into that text value. And then if I wanted to continue on, I could click the spy button again, and then click on search. And this is the search button, and in this, instead of using these three attributes, I'm going to use XPath, because I like XPath better, especially when I'm working in one of the IDEs. So if I click Generate Code, Control V, and then it kind of gives me my CSS, or not my CSS, my XPath value, or XPath definition to the button, and then again I can do .click. Same thing. So that I can save, and then if I close this, and then instead of clicking, because this button here for start, if you're familiar with IDEs, is where you compile the application, but we're not going to do that. We're going to come over here to the Test Explorer, and we can right-click on it, or we can click Run here, so we'll just run selected. And so if you blinked, you missed it, but basically put in .NET inside the text box, click the search button, and then now we can see the results. So similar concept with UFT, with for building your script and then playing it back. So then obviously your next step would be then what? Add some validation, and then it's probably data drive it. Again, conceptually, authoring scripts are going to be the same. You'll just be writing in a different IDE and a different language. So that's one way to build a script, is through using the identification center and then copying the source code in memory or on the clipboard and paste it in here. Next thing we can look at is using...
Did it type .NET and click?
Yeah, I did.
Excuse me?
No, just if they did type, I didn't see that.
Oh yeah, it went fast. And then if we have our application model here, whenever our screen decides to redraw itself, here we go. So this is, if you notice, I'm in this a different project. So if you're familiar with how Visual Studio works or .NET applications or Java-based applications work, you've got you got a project or a class file. A class project becomes a DLL, and then you've got a application model. It's kind of like our database model. So I'm storing this information. This is going to be my object model. So here I've got a list. If I wanted to, I'll bring up my. Let me close that. Let me do that again. Bring up the spy, and then I've got a couple of different buttons here. And then if I wanted to spy on that, I can kind of see some information there. Or if I want to spy on the text box, again, it gives me the same information. But this time, instead of copying the code to the clipboard, I'm just going to click Add to Application Model, and when I do so, then it adds it to the application model that I've created. So it's basically the equivalent of an object repository. If I click on here, you can kind of see some identification models. This is the property that I selected, and then the button here is the property I selected. You can even add like images in here if you want, and add other descriptive properties if you wanted to. And then I think you can highlight in here. So we had that feature in Object Repository, Object Spy. It's the same concept there. But instead of having descriptive code, I can, and I got some, for purpose of demonstration, got a code snippet. So now basically I have instantiated an object or a reference of this job search app model, which is what my app model is called. And now I can, for example, I have full access, so I can get access to the Go button or to the text field, etc. So just imagine if you had a form with an apply payment form with 20 different text fields on it and a button, then you could record all or learn all of those text fields and buttons and store them in your application object model, and then instead of having all this descriptive code, you can just have it really clean and just have a object-based test script. So app model object method, and then value, and then object button method. So cool. These 3 lines of code will do the same thing as these right here.
So you can slice it and dice it any way you want.
That's correct. Any questions?
Yeah, when would you, it seems like the latter is the way to go. When would you want to use the previous one?
That's a good question. I guess you'd probably answer it the same way you would do inside of UFT. Why use descriptive programming versus object repository? And I guess if there's values that are always changing or dynamically changing or what have you, and maybe the objects aren't being recognized the same, maybe you could do that. And so far in my experience for the past couple months using LeanFT, I haven't had that case because UFT doesn't have XPath type values. Well, 12.5 of UFT does, but most current versions don't. And so having the XPath value kind of eliminates the name of the object and the index of the object, which is kind of more of a path to it. To answer the question, it would, I guess, be a case-by-case scenario, but yes, you're correct. The latter part is the preferred method, just for reuse of objects and clean code. Because in theory, you could have someone just build this and then save it, and anybody can use it on your team to build a test script. That way, you're all using the same objects.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
That is all the time, unfortunately, I have as far as a demo is concerned. So I actually have a hard stop at 8:30, but I'll take any more questions. And if you don't have any more questions tonight, but you'd like to see more about LeanFT, you can probably, I believe I heard Mike Schmalz there in the room, right? So you can get with him, and he can schedule a solution architect, sales engineer to show you a more in-depth demonstration if you're interested. And then also the Caresoft group and Cortex as well can provide those same type of demonstrations as well. So definitely recommend using your local resources to learn more about what LeanFT is and what it can do for you.
Any good questions before we let Jeff go?
I have one question. Looks like pretty much we can do a lot of things in the UI testing. Are there anything specific we can do in the backend level, like resources, validation, REST API calls, and so on? So anything backend
Could you hear the question, Jeff?
Barely. Back-end testing?
Yeah, I mean, what we've seen so far is it's a lot of, the focus was on the user interface, but can LeanFT be used for other types of processing, like the back end or?
Well, so yes. So this is, if you're in .NET or in Java, you have full access to all the data libraries, which means you can, have access to ADO.NET or Entity Framework, pick an ORM, and you can, have access to do full, SQL queries on any database model that you want, and then you can put in unit test-based validations. If you're talking about like web service layer, that's currently not supported yet, but for future version of LeanFT will support web service layer from HTTP, SOAP, REST type interfaces. But I always recommend, I think, using UFT API is a lot easier when you're testing web services. So I always recommend that versus unit test for a web service.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.
One question.
Go ahead.
While I'm executing the test case written in .NET on this LeanFT, I can call the APIs to ALM or QC to write in the runtime into any of the fields. But if I'm using Eclipse or writing Java, I guess there is no Java API that is available to call with the Java language. Is that correct?
You need to use the REST-based client to interact with ALM when you're using Java.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, there's not a an OTA for Java. So you need to use the REST-based API. So if you've got ALM in your local organization, just
can we use the OTA to write into ALM fields? So,
oh yeah, all day. Yeah.
But yeah, so REST API you can use it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
Anybody else have questions? Danny, anybody? Jane?
I'm good. All right, well, let's thank Jeff for his time, everyone. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Jeff. Appreciate all your cooperation and flexibility with us, our rescheduling and everything.
Sure, no problem. You guys have a great evening, and you've got my contact information. Feel free to reach out.
Will do.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.